Well, we're here talking to the man, the guy who's responsible for this whole thing, of this great new movie
It's
called
all my
Atlas.
fault. It's all my fault.
I blame you, Brad.
Yeah.
I blame you, Brad. Well, first off, congratulations on making a great film. Second
Thank you.
of all, congratulations on having a great first name.
Yes, we've won that. We won that award, absolutely.
Now, first off, I really love this movie. This has
Thank you.
my DNA all in it. These are the kinds of movies that I love
Yeah.
and can appreciate. For you, from one Brad to another, if you can illuminate me on what was your initial attraction to the film, if you don't mind the surface level question, because there's some connective tissue to projects you've done in the past, but what was this one? Why did this one stand out as something you wanted to tackle?
Always wanted to do science fiction, like grew up sci-fi fantasy nerd. And if I only made sci-fi fantasy movies for the rest of my career, I would die a happy man. So there was that like big box I wanted to check. Rampage had a little bit of sci-fi, but this is like a true, we're going to space, we're going to an alien planet, we've got explosions, AI, mech suits, like sci-fi adventure film. And then I always also wanted to do a story with a strong female heroine. Like as soon as I saw Alien initially and then James Cameron's Aliens, I was like, this is amazing. And we've seen like Furiosa, we've seen these great female leads, and I always wanted to do that. So for me, those two things were probably the most strongest kind of weighted impetus towards me actually going and making this movie.
You mentioned Alien and Aliens, and I see the comparison to that. It's a very analogous movie for this project. But what were those young movies that you saw that have that connective tissue into this one? I mean, what were the films that were the influential ones that you find yourself kind of borrowing from, for lack of a better term?
So I would say one of them is like a deep cut sci-fi nerd one, which is called Robot Jocks, which is like really like you got to be an absolute sci-fi nerd to know what that is. And I think it was made in 1989 or 1990. It was a mix of like stop motion robots. It was sort of like a low budget sci-fi movie. I grew up in a really small place. And so like every sci-fi movie that I could rent, I would rent and watch. And that stuck in my head weirdly because I just thought, oh man, this is so cool. They're like piloting robots and fighting. And, so that was this weird one that stuck in my head. And then the second thing that happened to me is when I was 13, Terminator 2 came out. And now this movie isn't sort of connected to Terminator 2. However, when I saw Terminator 2, and you got to remember, I'm 13, so I'm like going to Subway and getting the cups that have Terminator on it. Like I'm like a little kid. And then someone points out to me, oh, did you know the filmmaker, the director is Canadian? And it blew my mind that James Cameron was a Canadian. And so like as a kid, James Cameron connected to me as a person because it was the first time ever I was like, oh, you could go to Hollywood and make sci-fi movies as a Canadian? Like that's possible? And so I have to say, like, he has had a big influence on me as a filmmaker. No specific movie, but if I had to point to one, it would be Aliens, because I felt like that's one of his greatest works in a way, because he's also taking from Ridley Scott and what Ridley Scott set up in Alien, and sort of he's openly said, like, I was trying to do a version of Ridley so that the two movies fit together. And so in a way, Aliens is like the best of Ridley Scott and the best of James Cameron. And that movie, when I saw that as a kid, I was like, this movie is so perfect. Like, I love this film. And I think you can kind of see that in the end of my movie when you get to Harlan's compound and it's the rain and the smoke and the grittiness. I was like, I felt so happy shooting that. I was like, oh, I'm getting to like do a little bit of Aliens on my own, So I would say Robot Jocks and probably just James Cameron's work in general are my biggest influences.
So, okay, I'm glad that you said that, because you've worked on a few, big not sci-fi, special effects type films,
Yeah.
right? Where there's a lot of reliance on the vision coming from your head. I heard Jerry Seinfeld, who just made his directorial debut.
Yeah.
Speaking of directors, for Unfrosted on Netflix, he was asked, do you see the movie in your head? He said, yes. And then the person he was talking to said, then you're going to be fine. When you go through a script like this,
Yeah.
Are you already seeing all these things in your mind as they're coming up and you can see the vision?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up Seinfeld. I just saw him live like 2 nights ago in Los Angeles.
Hollywood Bowl?
Yeah, it was amazing. He's a legend. The answer is yes. I think not everybody thinks this way. Like there's directing is not like, there's no blueprint to how to be a good director. There's so many different ways to be a good director and to approach the medium. I take it from a very audio visual place. It's about, for me, it's like about seeing and hearing the movie in my head. And I include hearing it because I've also had a lot of experiences where I'm like, okay, well, I want this to feel different. And rather than playing the big explosion, I'm not going to have any sound effects. I'm just going to play the score. And there's moments like that. And everything that you're picturing, whether it's seeing it or hearing it, is it's all about tapping into how am I going to emotionally engage the audience? How am I going to really put them in the same place the characters are that I want to be? How do I get them to feel? And so I think the danger with a lot of science fiction is it can get heady, it can get like cold. And for me, like going into this movie, I was really, really adamant about it being as emotional as possible, as fun as possible, as big an experience as possible, because I didn't really want to make a movie that was cold for a small audience. I wanted you to feel like, okay, like I felt like in the early 90s going to a movie where it was just like, this is a tight script, this is action packed, you're gonna laugh, I'm gonna freak you out in places, you might cry, like I'm building the ride and I want people to be able to go on it. So to me, I'm like always sort of focused on how can I get them to feel what I want them to feel, and my way in is thinking about what it looks like and feels like and what it sounds like and feels like.
Well, this movie, when you're saying that, it does make a lot of sense to me because one of the great things about Atlas is that it feels like a lived-in world,
Yeah.
right? Like when you're in the story, you feel like not only is it a lived-in world, it's almost a believable lived-in world because of the proliferation of AI.
Yeah.
And the movie's kind of coming out at a great time where that's a big part of the conversation in the public conscious and where these things are going to go. One of my favorite films you might be able to tell is Back to the Future and Back to the Future 2.
Yep.
And when they go to 2015, Bob Gale and Bob Zemeckis had all these fun ideas of, hey, this might happen in the future. 30 years later, what is the car going to look like? What is this going to look like?
Yeah.
Did you have a similar experience especially when you're in Atlas's apartment and you see all the gadgets that are around there?
Yeah.
Was it like, okay, let's try to make this like a believable evolution?
I mean, honestly, like that's what I try to do with all the films because you want it to feel lived in. You want it to feel believable so that you can lose yourself in the movie. And I'm glad you felt that way. I spend a lot of time on the world creation aspect. On this movie in particular, I met with and worked with futurists. I would like literally get on Zooms with people and their whole job is to think about what's going to come in the future, whether it be power systems, what would happen with the ecology of the world, AI in particular. Yeah, you absorb all of that information. Part of it is, what do I just want to see? Like, what would be super cool? What makes it really interesting? So, for example, when I'm depicting Los Angeles in the future, I put these big solar arrays because one of the things the futurists said is we're going to have to get better at taking advantage of the ecology that we live in. So it was about finding a way to say something new with the movie. Like, I didn't want to say, oh, Los Angeles in the future is going to be under sand dunes. Like, we've seen that. And also, when I'm talking to these futurists, they're like, that's not what's going to happen. That's just dramatic, and I get it, like, for a movie. But if you want, like, what's really going to happen, it's probably not going to be that. It's probably going to be a more tempered version of we have to grow into taking advantage of, like, solar power more. And also, part of this was just, I developed the script 5 years ago, so I could never have predicted that AI was going to be where it is today. But my whole approach was, well, I'm a big fan of these movies. I'm a big fan of Terminator 2 and all these movies that have touched on AI before. But the bulk of those movies say AI is the villain. And I came from a place of like, well, I don't want to do that. I've seen that. I don't want to repeat what these great filmmakers have done before. I want to add something new to the conversation. So my initial approach was, let's show both sides of the coin. Let's show how bad it could be and how good it could be. So that's why you see the villain, Harlan, played by Simu, is like, this has gone horribly wrong and we all may die because of this, this AI terrorist. And then you meet Smith, who is actually there to completely support Jennifer and just actually help her exceed what she believes she's capable of. So I wanted to show both extremes of it, and that was simply built off the place of, I don't want to be repetitious of what other movies have done.
And you're not. There is a lot here that to me feels fresh and new and helping move
Awesome.
the medium and the genre forward. So
Yeah.
again, congratulations on that. When you have a star like Jennifer Lopez, number one on the call sheet. She's, Jenny from the block, whatever,
Yeah.
nickname you want to use for her, who's been one of the great movie stars in the last several decades.
Yeah.
And she's involved in this from an action perspective, which she's had great action movies in the past, enough being one of them, Mother for Netflix.
Yep.
What does she bring to a project like this?
I mean, she brings a lot. I mean, I kind of put her in this sort of like a step above movie star and performer. She's almost like icon now. She's like living legend status. I mean, when you've done that much in your career in that amount of time, I believe like there's a lot of respect due to that. The thing about this was I set out to make this movie because of the reasons I said earlier about just really wanting to do a sci-fi movie, but I also set out to do it because I wanted to do a movie that I just had not seen before. And what I recognize as a filmmaker is that there's so many streaming services, there's so much out there. In order to cut through the clutter, you've got to do something unique and original. And I thought, this woman trapped inside of a mech suit on an alien planet. I've never seen this movie. I've never heard of this movie. Like, I want to go do this movie. And so when you go into that zone, you have to recognize there's going to be very unique challenges because you are going to make a very unique movie. One of the challenges on this movie, and there were a lot, is how do you make it really interesting, and how do you cast the right person who can sit inside of a mech suit, which I think she was on set in just the mech suit for like, I want to say 6 or 7 weeks. So it's just her in a mech suit acting opposite a disembodied voice that's coming through speakers and all these cameras, and she's by herself. And so part of the reason that I thought Jen was so amazing is because she is this global superstar, because she's used to going on stage by herself and driving a show to an entire stadium. That might suit going inside of this mech suit and performing to nobody in a way that a lot of actors wouldn't be able to wrap their arms around or embrace it. She's done this for a long time. It was still challenging, and I had to adapt in how I was a filmmaker in order to give her the freedom to be as intuitive as she needed to be. But part of the reason that I cast her was because of that background. And also, look, she's obviously very, very talented, but I think the virtue that stands out the most to me about her is her courage. To be able to come from where she's come from, to get to where she's gone, and to do all the things she's done. I think it was like Aristotle said, like the strongest virtue is courage, because without courage, the rest of the virtues don't exist. And it was like, I saw in her that virtue of being able to face any challenge. And I knew this movie was going to have a ton of them. And as soon as I realized that she had that in her as a person, I was like, okay, this is the right woman for the job. She's going to nail it. And I'm very, very proud of the performance she gave, because I think it's a very, very strong performance, and one that few people could pull off.
Well, she absolutely pulls it off. Everything about this movie to me works. My final question, because I only have a couple minutes with you left, is was there a particular direction that you found yourself giving to help people see a world that they can't see yet? If you understand what I'm saying, seeing something on the set where they can't see it yet visually.
This will amuse you more than anything. I would just say, no Hollywood bullshit, please. Because like, like you're talking to your DP and they'll be like, light it in a certain way. And you're like, well, that's some Hollywood bullshit. Like, that doesn't feel real at all, like, and he'd be like, what do you mean? I'm like, there's no source light for that, or, whatever, like a design. I'd be like, oh, that's some Hollywood bullshit. And because the thing is like you said, it's like, there's going to be enough Hollywood in this movie. It's a VFX driven extravaganza. Like it's a ride movie. So what I'm trying to do is ground it. And so I have to tell the technicians, please ground this as much as humanly possible. Please make the camera handheld in this moment, because we're falling, to a planet. Like, it can't be clean and polished. So no Hollywood bullshit, please. That was my shorthand to get them to be like, oh, he means grounded, real, because again, like I said, it's robots and an alien planet. Is like, it is a movie star movie, but I want it to feel real. I want it to feel lived in. So that was my quickest way to the answer.
Well, you know what? I love the direction and I love the movie. And thank you so much for spending some time with me. Great conversation with you, Brad. And congrats again on the movie.
Awesome, man. Thank you for having me.